Alrighty, welcome back to another devlog. This is number 25. So another week. I was able to finish up the last of the unit testing work. I put in automated testing for scene loading and scene traversal. Also, scene reloading when you do a player death, it'll fade out and it'll load you into the appropriate section of the map. All that was working at the beginning of the week. I would demonstrate it for you, but I tried going back and tried to reload the test, and of course, everything everything revolving around game loading from the main menu is pretty much broken. And even trying to go back into previous revisions in the repo, I was unable to actually get it working again. For some reason, it's broken. So I'll have to go back and fix that now. I'm not sure what's going on, but you just have to take my word for it. I added the last of the tests, so now I have a full coverage pretty much of all the features I've worked on so far. Now I can move on to other things and add more things, comfortable that I have at least some framework of testing around the major features of the project so far. So that led me to about Tuesday, and I began working to refactor the main menu, the pause menu, cameras, and other things, kind of to abstract them down to their minimum differences to avoid like duplicates. So if I'm working in VR and I fix a bug, then that bug still exists in the 2D version. So I want to kind of eliminate those differences as much as possible and kind of boil it down so I don't have multiple cameras I have to manage, and it just, yeah, kind of simplify things. So I started work on the actual camera system first. So I have my cameras here. So before I had two in-game cameras, one for 2D and one for a VR. Basically the only difference was on the camera we have this track pose driver. So it's just a matter of in code enabling it and disabling it for VR mode. So I found a way to detect whether or not you're running with the headset or not. There's a bit of code that you can call the system. It'll say yes or no that you're running the application in VR mode or not. So that saves me from actually having to go in and manually configure whether or not we're running in VR mode in the inspector or not. And pretty much now the whole system runs off that, so I don't have to. So I should just be able to put on the headset, connect it, run it, and it'll know to run the VR code instead of the 2D code. So I got the gameplay cameras refactored to use a single camera, and I kept bouncing back and forth between VR and 2D mode, testing, fixing until both of them are working properly. After that, I moved on to the next step of refactoring the pause menu. So previously, I had a pause menu canvas on the XR origin, and then a regular UI pause menu canvas. And I actually had two pause menu managers, one for here and then one for the XR. So I took away one of them, so you're only using one pause menu manager now, and it actually has references to both canvas depending on which mode you're in. It'll activate whether it's VR, it'll activate this canvas or it'll activate this canvas. So pretty much the difference between these canvases, this is not a prefab, but this is a world space and world space configuration, and this is screen space overlay. But I abstracted this pause menu UI because it's the same into its own prefab. So if you make a change and a fix in here, and you save it, it'll actually reflect here. So that's what I wanted. So I don't want two separate standalone instances. Just kind of abstracting the common elements into one. So that's all good. I ran into some trouble along the way, but I had to do a lot of testing and code review to figure out what it was. I had broke my my game manager load process, and after a bunch of backtracking, I figured out what it was. But by the end of the day, I had the pause menu refactored and working well in VR and 2D mode. So on to Wednesday. I tested out. I was starting to test out, and I was working on the main menu UI refactor. So previously in the cameras here, I had one menu camera, which is orthographic, which is good for 2D, where you're just seeing a menu canvas, like a regular canvas, a screen space overlay. But I also had a menu camera for VR, which is pretty much the same as my in-game camera, which is a perspective camera. So I eliminated the menu camera VR, and I decided to go and use the in-game camera, adapt it to work with the actual, since it's the same thing, since it's a perspective camera, to use that instead of two cameras to actually view the VR main menu. So I was beginning to test the VR main menu load process, and I was noticing. So once I refactored these cameras to use only one, I was noticing a bunch of issues I hadn't seen before. So there was a whole host of problems. Not only with visual polish, like the whole process from loading, starting in the game, and yeah, loading into the game, the actual visual. But there's a whole bunch of issues with the loading process. So a couple of the issues, the main menu kind of just abruptly cuts the screen to black when it and then it shows the loading screen. There's no fade out. It also cuts the audio because the audio was tied to the main menu. So I can actually, let's actually restart this here. Start this in VR mode. So if you look at the main menu, now what I have here, I've taken out the actual, so the same thing with the pause menu. I have it in its own scene. This is not a prefab, but this configures for a world space. But this here is a prefab, the common elements. And I've removed the audio manager and put it on a do not destroy, so it can transverse scenes. It can, because when this main menu goes away in favor for the loading screen, I want the audio to stick around, so it doesn't get cut out as soon as this scene is removed on the loading process. Um, so a bunch more issues with the loading process. When I'm loading into the game, the actual camera, since I'm actually holding the camera, I'm doing a bunch of things to actually, I'm changing the process. So it's not like just firing off a bunch of events and it all just happens. It's like a chaos and it ends up in the correct state. I was actually having to implement mechanisms to closely monitor the loading process with like fade outs and fade ins. So much more control, um, and actually specifically determine when to show things and when to not. Um, I employed a bunch of custom camera calling, so at certain phases, the actual camera is only allowed to see UI layer, and then later it gets switched to everything. Um, so Thursday was a tough day. It was kind of one of those days where felt like a slog in the mud. It didn't feel like I was actually getting problems solved at my usual pace. I was running into a lot of time with my process of wasted tests. I changed something in code, and either the breakpoints weren't hitting where they were, or it was doing unanticipated behavior, like it didn't compile my code. So, and each test, takes like every time you recompile, it's like a minute or two. So it just felt like a real grind on this particular day. But I think at the end of the day, I actually did do work because I was actually um, testing out the process and ironing out how the whole thing should work. So that kind of laid the foundation for the next day where I actually finally put everything together. But Thursday, it was a bunch of running tests on the loading process. Um, so in order to do the fade out, I actually reused um, for my pause menu. I have this background sphere that kind of fades in alpha. Not all the way, it just kind of gives like a transparency to kind of dim the background. So I had kind of the same thing. I put on the another background or another fade that actually goes all the way to black. So during the process, once the loading screen is finished, it it gives out a signal. I had to figure out how to hook up all the chain, the callbacks for when the loading screen is done to actually tell it to fade in or initialize and fade in the background sphere, and then so each stage, and then apply the culling to allow to see everything, and then finally fade fade out the background sphere so you can see the environment. So instead of you seeing all this loading graphical chaos that you usually see, it's added it's added an actual production polish to the loading process, which you actually see. So a lot going on behind the scenes, but it's just controlling the process so it doesn't look like a graphical train wreck and things are cutting out, audio cutting out. So a lot more polish on this loading process here. Um, had to make some adaptations to the loading screen. The underlying system, the loading screen studio, is it's not as good as an Refactor. It's pretty unfriendly to extension. It uses a lot of bad designs like singletons and stuff, but I finally got it to actually work, and I had to change it a bit to work with my system. So by the end of the day, I had gotten the camera fixed and loading into the correct position um, when you load the game, just like I usually did. On Friday, I was able to complete the VR main menu load in the game process with the fade-ins and fade-outs. Um, and then after that, I went back to the 2D implementation to see if everything was still working. Um, and of course, there's several broken things, but with some more work, I was able to separate out the VR versus 2D logic and get both of them back into shape, so both of them are working. So you can basically put on the headset and it works in VR mode to load, or you can disconnect the headset and it works in 2D mode. So that was it, almost it for Friday. Um, at the end of the Friday, I tackled a bunch of minor bugs, things that I had on my list, and I pretty much cleared out a lot of stuff on my Kanban board, a lot of stuff that had been hanging around, and my board is looking kind of empty these days. I have more little things to do next week, um, but it's actually looking good with this whole past week and this week. I pretty much knocked out all the bugs, got unit tests in place, and really ironed out this, uh, really refactored and ironed out this loading process with um, cleaner abstracted game objects. So that's a better design in the future. So from here, I'll go ahead and demonstrate the actual loading process you'll see in VR mode. Okay, let's try this again here. I got my controller, and you can starts on the story mode selected. You can still use your pointer, but also you can use the joystick to select up and down. So when we hit continue, it's probably going to go fast, but so it fades out, and this fades in, it does its loading screen, and it fades out again, and then it fades in along with the audio fade out, and it loads into the game with a different skybox instead of just black. So that whole process, went very quickly, but there was a lot going on in that whole process. So you're not seeing the camera jump around. You're not seeing a whole bunch of issues I had to iron out. So that's pretty much how that works. And then, so if we stop this, and let's just pull the plug for the headset. So that's disconnected, and the system should detect that no headsets detected, and it should respond appropriately. Okay, so now it's 2D orthographic mode. The mouse works, the gamepad works, and we'll continue this. And it's just a slightly different loading process. Since this is orthographic, taking up the entire screen, we still have a fade out and a fade in. Currently, there's a bug where the actual skybox didn't load in from black. I have to fix that. But everything else is working. Pause menu how it should, and whatnot. So that's pretty much the whole deal for this week. Let's see if I have anything else. So, yeah, my to-do list is getting kind of. I'll have to come up with more things to do for the project next week. I have a bunch of issues to iron out, a couple smaller issues to clean up for the start of next week, but we'll figure it out. That's about it for this week, and we'll talk to you later.